Hello and welcome, and as you can no doubt tell, today I'm talking about Pillars of Eternity by Obsidian Entertainment. Or is it Software? Whatever they're called. I could go and check, but I'm too lazy. And you know what I mean anyway. Anyway, Pillars of Eternity was, I believe, the first in a new wave of CRPGs, or computer RPGs, or whatever people want to call them these days. In particular, it is heavily inspired by the Infinity Engine games like the original Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Icewind Dale, which I recently did a video on, and Planescape Torment. But the thing is, these games never went away. These isometric RPGs have still been coming out, just in a quieter, smaller releases that I suppose many people didn't really notice. Well, you know, everyone's focusing on things like KOTOR, Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect, and everything's come since. You know, these isometric RPGs are throwbacks. Anyway, there was a resurgence of them, and Pillars of Eternity was one of the, well, if not the first, was one of the major ones that people paid attention to, as it had a very successful Kickstarter. Originally it was known as Project Eternity, before it even had a title. It's something that I heard about at the time and it grabbed my attention. I played the game pretty much from release. Anyway, aside from being an isometric RPG inspired by the Infinity Engine games, what is Pillars of Eternity? Well, it's a brand new world, or was on its release, a brand new fantasy world and setting with its own unique mechanics, or rule system. The Infinity Engine games, or the D&D based ones, were obviously inspired by D&D and used the variations on the Dungeons & Dragons rule set. And Pillars of Eternity is not a licensed game. There is similarities. It still has the real-time with paused combat. The basic interface is largely the same. The stats are very similar. Many of the abilities are quite similar, you can tell the inspiration, but they have changed the mechanics and developed their own system, adding more depth into the combat and things to really tailor it for a computer game rather than a tabletop RPG. But for the most part, your familiar classes are present and correct. You've got your fighters, your thieves, your magic users, your clerics or priestly type characters, plus every ciphers and a few variations of things, but it is largely familiar stuff. When it comes to the various forms of magic, again, it plays in a very similar manner to Dungeons & Dragons and the previous Infinity Engine games. Well, I say previous Infinity Engine games, this isn't the Infinity Engine, but it's just very similar. Which is to say, I suppose you could call it legally distinct Dungeons & Dragons. But don't let that put you off, because it does have a really good world and setting. It is all set in the world of Eora, largely in the region called the Deerwood. It's a medieval fantasy with Renaissance elements, or set somewhere. I suppose it's Renaissance, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's a fancy world. You've got your magic, your swords, there are gunpowder based weapons, but it is mainly swords and magic and things. The story begins with your character on some travels and having an encounter which leads them to become a watcher, which is someone who can perceive past lives and souls, which pulls you into the crisis of the Holyborn, which are children born without souls, and leads to a larger, wider reaching plot involving the cycle of life, gods, and yeah, I'm not going to spoil it here. If you have an interest in playing it, part of the fun of the game is letting the narrative play out and playing through it. It's a very rich world. It has very, I suppose, fancy novel-like writing. It's very descriptive. The writing is quite evocative. It deals with a lot of themes, whether it's identity, faith, political manipulation, and they say the science of souls, or science versus religion, I suppose. Not that it beats you over the head with anything too much, it just makes for a very rich, involved world and setting. The various companions you can get Baldur's Gate style can be quite interesting, some more than others. There are moral choices to be had throughout the game. I think for the most part they're handled well and can be quite interesting, with some of them even impacting the game going forward, or the narrative going forward. Do you choose one side or another? Again, the usual sort of thing. And in some cases you don't really see the long-term effect of it until the end game slide, which tell you the impact of your decisions. But there's even some moral choices with a couple of your companions, in which direction they, I suppose, take their trauma of the past and redirect it. Moving away from the narrative, the mechanics of the game, they are solid. However, the character creation and the in-game rule set aren't the easiest things to learn. There could have been a few more things in the character creation that explain things more thoroughly. It'll take you a while to learn, but for your first time playthrough, you're going in blind with perhaps a little less information than would be ideal. Although, as long as you pay attention, you can pick it all up as you go, and for subsequent playthroughs, that provides much less of an issue. I think that if you're a fan of the Infinity Engine games from back in the day, it won't take you too long to find your feet. On the visual front, as you can no doubt see, it is a nice looking game. I mean, it's certainly not peak technology even from 10 years ago. But the environment design is very good. I guess it's very evocative. The characters are detailed enough for the view you have them at for the most part. The presentation is very in keeping with the games that inspired it. Overall, it does a very good job of staying true to its inspiration while also dragging the style of gameplay into a more modern era. And the overall presentation is solid. There's a nice touch with there's some decisions or interactions you'll make where you'll effectively have a text-based role-playing system. It's very simple, and you've got some very story vignettes which look like something out of a D&D rulebook. The game's soundtrack evokes the classic CRPGs that inspired it, and I think it sits somewhere between the soundtracks of Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, with a mixture of tense battle cues and quite ambient orchestral music that it sits in the background nicely. It supports the atmosphere, but it doesn't really overwhelm like it in some other games. Anyway, all this is to say that I like Pillars of Eternity a lot. For me, it sits somewhere between the original Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, as it has elements of both. Even though on first glance it is more like Baldur's Gate, especially the way the world map plays out, and the fact that you do have a central protagonist and you recruit companions. You can also hire NPC characters which you create to create a team that is very much like you do in Icewind Dale. And I really liked the addition of the keep. Essentially, at some point in the game, you end up holding up at an old keep which becomes your safe hold or your stronghold, if you like. And you can spend money to do it up and improve various bits and have more NPCs there. And there's also a section in it called the Endless Paths, which is a very, I suppose, Icewind Dale style dungeon crawl. They get more difficult as you go deeper and deeper into the Endless Paths. For me, it was a perfect update to the formula of the Infinity Engine games. I know at the time when it came out there were some that lamented that it didn't do enough to push things forward, but personally I think it struck the right balance. The sequel, Pillars of Eternity 2, did push things forward, with it being more technically proficient with some better graphics, more effects, and other little touches, but maybe I'll cover that in another video at some point, as I do need to do a replay of it, as I've played through it fewer times than I have the original. Of course, that leads us to Avowed, which is the spin-off game set in the same world, the world of Eora, that puts things in a first-person view more akin to Skyrim or Fallout or the Outer Worlds. And I've only played the beginning of it. I was really excited to give it a go, but when it came out I was far more into the Evercade and retro gaming. I played the opening, quite enjoyed it, was quite impressed with it, but I never got round to playing anymore. And as I was playing it on Game Pass, I don't own the game and I don't have Game Pass anymore, so at some point I will go back to it and play it properly. And I mention that is because it does seem that the Pillars of Eternity series might be a bit dead now, with the recent restructuring over at Microsoft and Obsidian being pushed on to doing a Fallout game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if it means there are no further Pillars of Eternity games or spin-offs, then well, that's a shame, as it does seem that Avowed 2 was cancelled. Anyway, I think I'm almost done here. I mean, there's a lot I could say about Pillars of Eternity, but there is a wealth of videos already out there, particularly by Mortismal Gaming, and they go far more in depth into it than I ever could. But I still wanted to share my thoughts on the game, as it is a game and a style of game that I do really appreciate. Anyway, as I said, I think that's quite enough for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.